I want you to think about how a child today consumes entertainment. It's incredibly personalized, almost surgically so.
Oh, absolutely. Hyper-personalized.
Right. You have an algorithm serving up this frictionless, infinite feed of content that's specifically tailored to your individual brain chemistry, mostly on a glass screen. It's private and it's quiet.
Really quiet.
But looking at your video feed today with the neon backlight and those like meticulously stacked boxes of vintage action figures behind you, it looks like you are broadcasting straight from a 1985 department store. We are dealing with a very different vibe.
Yeah, it is a completely different universe.
Yeah.
I set up this backdrop because the contrast between then and now isn't just, a shift in technology. It's a fundamental shift in human behavior.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. We have moved from a very loud, highly physical, communal reality to an ecosystem that is structurally isolating.
And exploring the mechanics of that shift is really our mission in this deep dive. We are digging into excerpts from a fantastic source called Plastic Memories, the Gen X Analog to Digital Childhood. Such a great collection.
It really is. The goal today is to examine how Generation X lived through a totally unique, unrepeatable, historical pivot. They were the very last generation to have a fully analog childhood.
Right, in the dirt, physical toys.
Exactly, and the first to lay the bricks for the digital age.
Which puts them in a wildly fascinating sociological position. I mean, their developmental years were split right down the middle.
Yeah.
They literally have one foot planting in the dirt of the backyard and the other stepping onto the glowing, pixelated grid of the digital frontier.
So I want you, the listener, to really put yourself in this headspace. Imagine an era entirely devoid of algorithms.
Hard to do nowadays.
So hard. No fragmented streaming platforms,
Yeah.
no hyper-personalized YouTube recommendations funneling you into a niche.
Just a completely shared reality.
Yes. Unlike today, Gen X had this massive, unified, shared cultural experience. Millions of kids from the suburbs of Chicago to the high-rises of Manhattan were consuming the exact same media.
Longing for the exact same toys. At the exact same time. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin to understand how a monoculture like that functioned?
Well, we actually have to begin by stripping away the toys entirely.
Wait, really?
Yeah, before we can analyze the plastic, we have to understand the void that made those objects necessary in the first place. We are talking about an environment completely disconnected from modern tracking or communication.
Oh, right.
There were no smartphones, no life tracking apps, no text threads.
Just the universal ironclad parental decree of be home before dark.
Exactly. And it's funny you call it a decree because it functioned more like an eviction notice.
An eviction notice.
It really was. When school ended or, Saturday morning rolled around, kids were essentially locked out of the house. They just disappeared into the neighborhood for 6 to 8 hours at a time.
Just gone.
Just gone. The source material highlights kids riding BMX bikes until the tires literally wore out, playing entirely unsupervised backyard sports, exploring concrete drainage ditches.
Or just showing up at a friend's front door without any warning whatsoever.
Right, which today feels almost aggressive.
It really does. That dynamic makes me think of the 1980s neighborhood as essentially a physical, open-world video game.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Think about it. There was no group chat to coordinate your afternoon. You couldn't check a map app to see where your friends were congregating.
Nope.
You just got on your bike, rode down the street, and basically hoped your friends had spawned on the map.
That is exactly what it was like.
And if they weren't at their house, you just rode to the next waypoint.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, that lack of instant connectivity forced a kind of relentless resourcefulness.
How so?
Because there was no screen in their pocket feeding them a passive narrative, these kids had to generate their own dopamine through imagination.
Right.
The neighborhood wasn't just a physical space, it was a blank canvas.
Yeah.
A suburban cul-de-sac became a post-apocalyptic wasteland. A patch of woods became an alien planet.
So they were doing all the heavy lifting mentally.
Exactly. The sheer, unadulterated boredom of the analog world was the exact pressure cooker needed to generate deep creativity.
Which brings us perfectly to the toys. Because if the neighborhood is a blank canvas, you need props for the world building.
You definitely need props.
But here's the logistical puzzle that has always fascinated me. Without the internet, without influencers, without viral TikTok trends, how did millions of kids inherently know what the cool props were?
Right. How did the information spread?
Exactly. The information hub wasn't a glowing rectangle in their pocket. It was a physical location.
The department store toy aisle. It was
Yes.
the mecca of 1980s childhood.
I really want to ask you, listening to this right now, can you imagine treating a physical store shelf the way we treat a social media feed today? Because that is the closest equivalent.
It functioned exactly like a primitive social feed. I mean, kids would spend an hour just staring at the shelves, processing data.
Processing data, just looking at cardboard.
Literally. They were analyzing the back of the boxes to see the cross-sells, the new action figures, the vehicles they hadn't seen on TV yet, the massive play sets.
Oh, the cross-sells on the back of the box were legendary.
They were. The aisle was where you went to download the latest rumors, absorb the marketing hype, and construct the dreams of what you might aggressively negotiate for your birthday.
And then the schoolyard was the router that distributed that downloaded information.
Exactly.
It was this national network of whispers. You'd sit at the cafeteria table and someone would say, I heard Castle Grayskull is back in stock at Toys R Us.
Or, did you see the file card for the new G.I. Joe sniper?
Yes.
Those schoolyard conversations were acting as a national nervous system. Discussing toys for kids in the 1980s wasn't just idle play. It was the equivalent of adults discussing global current events or prestige television today.
It was the cultural currency.
It was the currency of connection. A kid in rural Ohio and a kid in Los Angeles were having the exact same conversation about the exact same piece of molded plastic.
Okay, let's actually look at the mechanics of those trending topics, because the source material dives deep into the specific toy lines, and what stands out to me isn't just what the toys were, but how play mechanics evolved over the decade.
It was a huge evolution.
We aren't just talking about static dolls here. Let's start with the archetype He-Man and the Masters of the Universe.
Yeah, He-Man is the defining baseline of the 1980s action figure boom.
The scale of them alone.
Right, the scale was larger, chunkier. The heroes and villains were visually explosive, drenched in neon colors. It was pure fantasy world building.
And the gravitational center of that world was Castle Grayskull.
Oh, absolutely. Owning Castle Grayskull meant you didn't just own a character, you owned the geography of the universe.
But let me push back on this idea that these branded toys fueled boundless imagination.
Okay, lay it on me.
I've always harbored this theory that toys like He-Man actually stifled creativity. You had a cartoon that literally broadcasted into your living room every afternoon, explicitly telling you, this is the good guy, this is the bad guy, this is how they fight.
It fed you the lore.
Exactly. It fed you the lore. Where's the imagination in just repeating a script a marketing executive wrote for you?
I see the logic there, but the reality on the living room rug was completely different. The cartoon was just the marketing wrapper to get the toy into the house.
Interesting.
Yeah, once the plastic hit the carpet, kids entirely threw out the corporate lore.
Yeah.
That was the genius of it. He-Man would routinely get shoved into a Barbie Corvette.
Right.
Or suddenly he was forming an alliance with Cobra Commander to fight a stuffed animal. The child was the director, and they aggressively rewrote the script every afternoon.
Okay, fair point. The crossover events in the living room were legendary. But if He-Man was pure chaotic fantasy, G.I. Joe feels like an evolution into something much more structured.
Very much so.
We transitioned from swords and sorcery to data. The genius of G.I. Joe wasn't just the articulation of the figures, it was the file cards. You'd cut out this little dossier on the back of the package.
Yep.
I look at those now and realize they were essentially early RPG character stats.
They absolutely were an introduction to database management for children.
Database management, that's
It's
hilarious.
true. You weren't just playing, you were parsing stats. You knew their real name, their military specialty, where they were born, what languages they spoke.
Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, Duke, Flint, Destro.
Right. It gave the child a sense of administrative control.
You didn't just collect G.I. Joes. You were acting as a 5-star general managing human resources. And we can't talk about G.I. Joe without mentioning the mythical white whale of the 1980s, the USS Flagg aircraft carrier.
Oh, wow. 7.5 feet of plastic dominance.
It was absurdly huge.
Very few children actually owned one, which only exponentially increased its mythic status. It
Yeah.
remains one of the most iconic consumer products ever manufactured because it represents the sheer, audacious, unapologetic scale of 1980s toy culture.
So from the data-driven play of G.I. Joe, the toys then evolved into cognitive friction. Enter Transformers.
Yes, the heavy hitters.
I remember looking at these and thinking, wait, a robot that folds into a semi-truck? It felt like someone handed you actual alien technology.
Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, Megatron.
But the magic of Transformers wasn't just the characters. It was the fact that they were essentially action figures crossed with a Rubik's Cube. Some of those instructions were brutally hard.
They were. But that mechanical friction is a crucial psychological element. It wasn't just imaginative play anymore. It was a tactile puzzle.
Right.
Sometimes you succeeded in transforming them, and sometimes you had to unfold those massive map-like paper instructions and study them like blueprints.
And sometimes you just jammed a piece and broke it.
Exactly. But that physical friction, the clicking of the joints, the frustration of getting a piece stuck, it built attention span. It made characters like Optimus Prime feel earned because you had to put in the manual labor to reveal him.
We also have to cross the aisle because the quote-unquote girls aisle was driving an entirely different, equally massive evolution in play mechanics.
Oh, absolutely.
It wasn't about building standing armies or mechanical friction. It was about sensory memory and complex social ecosystems. Take Strawberry Shortcake.
Strawberry Shortcake is a fascinating case study in sensory marketing. The world was warm, colorful, and centered on themes of collaboration and kindness rather than combat.
But the scent was the key.
Crucially, it engaged the olfactory bulb. The dolls were strongly scented.
Which perfectly explains why, decades later, a Gen X woman can walk past a bakery, catch a whiff of artificial vanilla or strawberry, and instantly be transported back to her childhood bedroom in 1983.
It literally hardwired nostalgia into their brain chemistry.
It's amazing.
Sensory memory bypasses logic entirely. And building on that emotional connection, you had lines like Rainbow Brite, which represented this absolute, unironic optimism.
And My Little Pony.
Right, which didn't rely on a central conflict. Instead, it encouraged kids to build intricate, sprawling communities. It was system design, just utilizing a different emotional palette than the military toys.
But let's not pretend the 80s were entirely wholesome.
Far from it.
The consumerism had a dark, chaotic underbelly. The crazes. Specifically, the Cabbage Patch Kids phenomenon.
Oh, boy.
The news footage from that era is terrifying. Grown adults were physically brawling in the aisles of department stores.
Trampling each other.
Trampling each other to secure a soft sculpted doll with yarn for hair. I've always wondered, was the Cabbage Patch craze actually about the kids at all? My theory is it was about the parents feeling the intense pressure of 1980s consumer status.
Interesting.
Yeah, they needed to secure those adoption papers to prove to the neighborhood that they were successful providers.
I think you've hit on the exact psychological undercurrent there. It was a brilliant, slightly manipulative shift in framing by the creators.
How do you mean?
Well, you weren't buying a mass-produced doll. You were, quote-unquote, adopting a unique individual. Each Cabbage Patch Kid had a slightly different face, a unique name, and literal birth certificates.
This is so wild.
It personalized mass consumption, and for the parents, acquiring one became a public display of parental devotion.
And physics dictates that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. If Cabbage Patch Kids were the sanitized, parent-approved, wholesome side of the decade, the universe had to balance the scales.
Enter the Garbage Pail Kid.
Exactly.
The ultimate punk rock rebellion in a wax pack. They took the pristine adoption concept and dragged it through the mud.
They were so gross.
They were grotesque, they were absurdly violent in a cartoonish way, and by every metric of the PTA, they were highly inappropriate.
Which is precisely why they became the most vital currency in the elementary school economy. The cafeteria turned into a Wall Street trading floor. Having a rare Garbage Pail Kid gave you actual social leverage.
They captured the defining, mischievous humor of Generation X. It was a generation realizing that they could push back against the sanitized corporate versions of childhood being sold to them.
Yeah.
Whether it was He-Man, Transformers, or Garbage Pail Kids, the overarching theme of this analog era was active participation. The child was the engine.
But Gen X didn't stay entirely in the analog dirt, because an entirely new canvas arrived.
They certainly did not.
And it didn't just arrive in the toy aisle, it infiltrated the living room, shifting this generation from the masters of plastic to the pioneers of pixels.
The digital invasion. And it is vital to understand that for Gen X, video games didn't feel like a gradual technological update. It felt like a portal to the future had suddenly opened next to the sofa.
We have to talk about Atari. Because before Atari, a television set was just a glowing box you stared at passively.
Right, you just consumed.
You absorbed whatever 3 networks decided to broadcast at you. Atari fundamentally shattered that relationship. For the first time in human history, a child could manipulate a plastic joystick, and the electrons on the television screen would obey their command.
Today, games like Pac-Man, Asteroids, Frogger, and Space Invaders look incredibly primitive.
Oh, completely.
Just blocky pixels and synthesized bleeps. But in the early 1980s, the realization that you had agency over the broadcast was a paradigm shift. It gave kids digital autonomy.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The console at home was just the appetizer. The real cultural epicenter was the arcade.
Yes.
Because an arcade wasn't just a dark room filled with noisy cabinets. It was a coliseum. It was a complex, ruthless social hierarchy.
What's fascinating here is the sociological function of the arcade. It was fundamentally a place of public performance.
Public performance, right.
Think about the physical act of placing your quarter on the edge of the glass screen to reserve your turn. That was a binding social contract.
Oh, you didn't mess with someone's quarter.
Never. You stood in the glow of the CRT monitor watching older kids play, memorizing the timing of the ghosts in Pac-Man or the descent patterns in Space Invaders.
It turned gaming into a spectator sport. If you could stretch one quarter for 20 minutes on Defender, you became a local deity. People would crowd around your shoulders just to witness your high score run. It was very public, very loud.
But then comes the hinge point of the entire digital transition. The arcade was public performance, but the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES, brought private mastery.
The legendary gray box. The ultimate Christmas morning reveal.
Atari gave you basic interaction. The arcade gave you public competition. But Nintendo introduced deep, sprawling narrative into the home.
Yeah, real stories.
With games like Super Mario Bros. Or The Legend of Zelda, you weren't just moving a square to eat a dot. You were exploring horizontally scrolling worlds. You were uncovering hidden secrets.
And most importantly, you could pause the game.
Yes. You could fail in the privacy of your own living room, learn the pattern, and try again. It built internal resilience rather than just eating your quarters.
Super Mario Bros. Literally became a new shared language. Just like kids used to ask, did you get the new G.I. Joe? The Cafeteria Whisper Network evolved into, did you figure out how to find the warp whistle in Super Mario 3?
It solidified that common cultural experience, but transferred it seamlessly from the physical realm of plastic into the digital realm of code.
Now, looking back, it would be really easy to assume that the moment the NES was plugged into the wall, analog toy culture was instantly vaporized. Boom, pencils win, plastic loses.
But that wasn't the case at all.
No, because the defining feature of Gen X isn't replacement, it's coexistence.
That is the most crucial distinction of this specific micro-generation. The toys didn't go in the trash when the Nintendo arrived. Look at the typical Saturday routine in a year like 1987.
Ah, the perfect Saturday.
Walk us through it.
I like to think of Saturday morning cartoons as a national metronome. They synchronize the biological clocks of millions of kids nationwide. You wake up at 7 a.m., you eat a bowl of neon-colored cereal, and you watch the Smurfs.
Classic.
Then, midday, you fire up the Nintendo to try and beat a boss level. But you don't stay there. By 2 p.m., you are back outside on the BMX bike, scraping your knees, or staging massive G.I. Joe campaigns in the backyard mud. And then, as the streetlights flicker on, you head back inside for more Nintendo.
The analog dirt and the digital grid existed in a perfectly balanced ecosystem. Later generations rarely experienced that equilibrium. The digital eventually cannibalized the analog entirely, but Gen X lived in the exact center of the Venn diagram.
Which brings us to right now. Because Gen Xers are now parents, and many are becoming grandparents. And they are engaging in this really poignant ritual.
Passing down the artifacts.
Yes, they are climbing into hot attics, opening up dusty plastic storage bins, pulling out a yellowing Nintendo cartridge or a surprisingly intact Transformer, and they are handing it down to a child who has an iPad in their backpack. So what does this all mean? Why the obsession with preserving the physical object?
Because it's not about the plastic, and it's not about the microchip. Those objects have transmuted. They are living artifacts.
Wow.
When a Gen X parent hands a kid a vintage He-Man or explains the sheer sociological panic of a Cabbage Patch Kid adoption, the conversation isn't about the toy's features. They are trying to pass down the feeling of a world that no longer exists.
They're saying, this was how I learned to build a world from scratch, before I had a mortgage, before I had a career, and before a smartphone dictated my attention.
Exactly. Sharing the artifact is a desperate, beautiful attempt to share a piece of who they used to be before the algorithms took over.
It really is a staggering journey when you step back and view the timeline. We've gone from roaming the neighborhood without a map until the streetlights came on, to acting as five-star generals managing armies on the living room rug, to experiencing the absolute sci-fi revelation of controlling a television screen with Atari and Nintendo.
It's a huge leap in a very short time.
Generation X truly stood at the crossroads of human history, experiencing the final, chaotic sunset of a purely analog world while personally laying the foundation for the digital one.
They did. And analyzing this transition leaves us with an entirely new, slightly unsettling question to consider about where technology is taking us next.
Oh, what's that?
As our entertainment today becomes infinitely fragmented and personalized by algorithms, are we losing the ability to have a unified shared culture like the one Gen X built around a single toy aisle or video game? And if we no longer share the same fictional worlds, how will future generations find their common language decades from now?
That is a brilliant and kind of haunting question to chew on. The infinitely fragmented digital feed versus the free suburban cul-de-sac. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive and walking us through it.
It was my pleasure.
And to you listening, until next time, keep exploring.